Hakadosh Baruch Hu, Masechet Yevamot Daf Amud Aleph 33a1. I just wanted to mention again, as Akdama, just to understand that there's two different aspects over here. Something which is called an Isur Kolel and something which is called an Isur Mosif. Okay? The concept of Isur Kolel is that it's a prohibition in general which adds on other things, right, which was permitted beforehand. However, though, it does not add an Isur in the Chefetz Atzmo, in the person himself. So an Isur Kolel is in general. It does add prohibitions, but on other things. On himself, it does not add. That's called an Isur Kolel. Isur Mosif means on the same human being, it's adding on another concept. It's adding on another prohibition. So that's called Isur Kolel and Isur Mosif. Yesterday's daf, we had three different machlokot, and that's how we're going to be starting today's daf. Yesterday's daf, we had three different machlokot. One of them was, right, melika, okay? One of them was balmum betuma, okay? And one of them was azar on Shabbat. So if you remember yesterday's daf, just very quickly, just so we get the flow of today. Yesterday, what did we say? We said that if you have a zar, which is a stranger, that he comes and he works on Shabbat in the Bet HaMikdash. So he said, he's right now mechalel Shabbat, plus he's worked in the Bet HaMikdash and he's not a Kohen. So that's two different Isurim. So if you remember, right, there was a machloket there between Bar Kapara and Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia comes and he says, you're obligated two averot because of two different averot. Bar Kapara said, only one averah. Okay? The same halacha applied to a balmum sheshimesh. You have a person that's a Kohen, but he's a balmum, he's got a blemish, and he worked in the Bet HaMikdash. So he does two averot. Number one, right, he says you're going to do that, you're doing the Bet HaMikdash when you're a mum, you're a balmum. And number two, he's tameh. So therefore, if you have this balmum that's working the Bet HaMikdash when he's tameh, he's got tum'ah and balmum. That's two different averot. Machloket, again, right? The Rabbi Chia says two averot, Bar Kapra says one averah. Okay, and the last case was zar she'achal melika. Remember in the Bet HaMikdash, the Kohanim used to use melika, which was with the thumb, right? The thumb they used to come and they used to cut with a nail, right? They used to do shechita. But for us, that's considered nevela. Only a Kohen can eat the birds in that fashion. For us, it's considered nevela. So if you have a zar, which is a stranger, non-Kohen, that he comes and he eats from the basar of the korbanot of these birds with melika, he's got two averot. He's a zar that's eating from the korban from the korbanot, right? That he's not allowed to, right? He's talking about things which have to do with the Bet HaMikdash. And number two, he's eating a nevela. So there's a two averot. So each time again there was going to be two averot or one averah. Bar Kapra kept on saying it's only going to be one averah. Okay. So now we're going to start today's daf. Let me give you Amud Aleph. What exactly is the machloket between these two shitot? So says the Gemara. The Isur Kolel, this is talking about to do with an Isur Kolel and Aliba de Rabbi Yosef. I already explained to you at the beginning what is an Isur Kolel. Isur Kolel means that you're going to have an Isur which is going to be Chal on another Isur, right? But it's a Machloket in Shitat Rabbi Yosef. Because Rabbi Yosef holds that when you have a person that he has relations with the sister-in-law, his brother's wife, but she's also the sister-in-law, because it's his wife's sister. So it's two things. It's his brother's wife and his wife's sister. So now in such a case, he's going to be chayav two different isurim because of the brother's wife and the wife's sister. No, there are two different cases. This is now this case. Okay, now from here we say, Rabbi Yosef comes and he says, right, that isur chalal isur. What does that mean? One isur is going to add on to another isur, right? And as long as it's adding on to the other isur, right, we came and we said, what happens? We said that migu, which means from the fact that the isur, which is adding on, is going to fall onto the person, so to everything else also falls onto the person. Okay? So, exactly. Yeah, 100%. Exactly. So what happened? So now he comes and he says like this. You have the exact same case, right, where you have a isur mosif and the isur kolel. Again, we're talking about two brothers getting married to two sisters. Okay? Now, what happens? In the case where the brother that stayed alive, Shimon, if he comes and he's going to get married first, yeah, and then, right, the brother Reuven, right, comes, right, and he gets married to the sister. So in such a case, what is it? It's an Isur Musif. Yeah. However, though, yeah, you understood the case. One more time. You have two brothers marrying two sisters who got married first, right? In the case of where the one that stayed alive, which is Shimon, right? He comes and he got married first, and only afterwards did Reuven get married to the sister. So that's called an Isur Musif. In the case of where Reuven that died, he got married first, and only afterwards did Shimon get married to the sister. That's called an Isur Kolel. Okay? If you look, as it says over here, yeah, he comes and he says like this. He says, Isur Mosif is that the second Isur is going to add in the same object. So therefore he comes and he says, right, like an Isur Kolel, you're not adding anything in the same object, it's adding on everything else. So he comes and he says, the Torah prohibited to eat the nevela all year. So now when it comes Yom Kippur, right, that you're not allowed to eat at all, so now it's not an extra Isur on the nevela, okay? But the person himself is Isur to eat just like everyone else in the world. So the eating of Achilon Yom Kippur is called an Isur Kolel, okay? Because it's Kolel nevela, it's on everything, it's in general, okay? Isur Achot Isha binyanenu. So in our case, right, what are we talking about? Achot Isha. So remember, we're talking about the wife's sister, okay? So therefore he comes and he says it is, when Shimon, right, gets married to the sister of his sister-in-law, which means that he's getting married to Reuven's wife's sister. Remember, two brothers getting married to two sisters. So therefore, the Nisuim are not adding anything on, right, they're not adding anything on. Because at the end of the day, it was already a sur to him. Because Shimon was already a sur beforehand, because it was a shetach. Okay, the only thing is that now he's got an additional thing, right, which is basically the concept of a chotisha. So the chotisha is going to be kolel chafatzim nosafim, right, but it doesn't add anything on him, because for him it's already a shetach. It's already prohibited to him. However, though, if you're going to tell me now in the previous case, which was basically Shimon gets married first, and then only does Reuven get married. And remember, Reuven is the one that's dying. So therefore, the marriage of Reuven is adding on to the wife, right? Is adding on to Shimon, right? Because by the other brothers, beforehand, it was only a chotisha. Now it's also Isur Musif, right? Because now it's also adding on that now it's going to become Eshet Ach. That beforehand you didn't have that. I'll say, okay, so you have two different Isurim. So says now the Gemara, Rabbi Chia Savar, Rabbi Yoseh, B'Isur Kolel Mechayev Tarte. Rabbi Chia holds that according to Shitat Rabbi Yoseh, when you have an Isur Kolel, remember, Kolel means that we're adding on, but we're not adding on an extra Isur on the actual item. You're adding on, it's a general Isur. So therefore, Mechayev Tarte, you're going to be Chayav two different Isurim. Okay, on the Isur Rishon and the Isur Kolel, which is the general Isur, which is coming afterwards. The Bar Kapara holds, Lo Mechayev Elachad, that you're only going to be Chayav only on one, because according to him, you're only going to have two when you have an Isur Mosif, you're adding on to the person, but not an Isur Kolel. So says the Gemara, 1 second. Now let's go back to the three cases that we mentioned. We started off the shiur this morning by mentioning that there were three different cases. So he says, what was the Isur Kolel over here? So says the Gemara, Bishlema, I understand Azar, right, the stranger that he worked on Shabbat, right? So therefore, Mikara, right, Shadi Bimlacha, at the beginning before Shabbat, it was permitted to work. Okay, that was general. V'asur ba'avodah. Now he was prohibited to work in the Beit HaMikdash because he's Azar. Okay, Atila Shabbat. Now comes Shabbat. Migo de kamitza b'melacha. Just like now he becomes prohibited to work on Melacha on Shabbat, because that's an Isur Kolel. It's in general, it's for everybody. Nobody's allowed to work on Shabbat. So mitzah nami b'avodah. So therefore also it should become Asur, also navodah. Right? Why? Because now you have the avodah in the Beit HaMikdash. So besides the concept of zarut, that he's a zar, that he's a stranger, he's not allowed to work. And Bar Kapara holds that only in Isur Mosif can you say migu. You don't mean that means Only by Nisur Musif can you say that you're adding it on, and not by Nisur Kolel. Okay? Second one, right, is going to be the Balmum. The Balmum that he was working Betum'ah. What was Betum'ah? Again, he's Tameh, but he's a Balmum. He's not allowed to work on Bet HaMikdash anyway. So therefore, Mikar at the beginning, before he became Tameh, Shari Ba'achila, he's allowed to eat all the Korbanot. Okay? Ve'asur Ba'avudah. And he's not allowed to work in the Bet HaMikdash. Itamule, now that he becomes Tameh, now that he cannot eat right in the kochim because now he's tameh, so that's an isur kolel. Okay, mitzanami ba'avodah, so he should become also he should become asur in doing the avodah bet hamikdash. And again, this is an isur kolel. So according to Bar Kapara, you don't say that. You only chayav one because it's only by isur mosif can you do such a thing, but not by isur kolel. Ella melika. What about melika? Yeah. Right, says the Gemara, Melika bevatachati de mishkachala, beisur kolel mishkachala. You cannot find it. Yeah, what does that mean? By nisur, by the concept of the Melika, what was the case of the Melika? The zar, the stranger, right, was not allowed to eat from the sar chatata off, right, that's going to be killed through Melika. Now, 1 second. If you think about it, the two isurim, right, you're always going to be chayav in one shot. Right? What does that mean? The shat melika. Why? Because during the time of melika, it's considered a nevela because you didn't kill it through shechita. Plus, during the time of the melika, it's considered that it was a korban, right? But beforehand, it's not considered a korban. So therefore, when you do the melika, both melikas, yeah, with the thumb, yeah. So both isurim come at the same time. The isur of nevela and the isur of kochi. Yeah, he's a zar. He's not allowed to eat from the basar of the kochi. So therefore, they both came at the exact same moment. So what isur kolel is there? Forget about now isur mosif, that there's nothing here, right? They both come at the exact same time. So they both come at the exact same time. So therefore, what do you mean it's isur kolel? I understood isur kolel beforehand because in each one of the cases, you were adding on a general prohibition. Beforehand, it was not Shabbat, so you're allowed to work, and now it becomes Shabbat. So Shabbat is not on him, it's on everybody in the world. So it's Yisur Kolel. It adds on in general. The second one also, right? When it comes to do with Tum'ah is not only on him, it's on everybody in the world. That if somebody's Tameh, they're not allowed to eat the Korbanot, or not allowed to come into the Bet HaMikdash. But it's not specifically on him. That's a Yisur Kolel. But it comes afterwards. It doesn't come in the exact same moment. Here, it's coming in the exact same moment. So answers the Gemara, you're right. What are we talking about? In each one of them, Elekami Palgeh, Be'isur bat achat. The machloket is if it comes at the exact same moment. Ve'aliba de Rabbi Yosef, according to the Shita of Rabbi Yosef, right, that we're going to say that do we say that the two isurim chal, right, in one moment, or do we say only one of them is chal? So Rabbi Chia Savar, Rabbi Chia holds that according to, right, Rabbi Yosef, when a person comes and he has relations with his sister-in-law, which is his brother's wife as well, so it's two isurim. Achot isha, right? Achot ishto, which is the sister of his the wife's sister, plus eshet ach, the brother's wife. The two isurim here, right? So he comes and he says beisur bat achat, which means that this woman became eshet achiv and also achot isha in the exact same moment, right? How do you do that? So, for example, they both made a shliach to do kiddushin for both the wives in one moment. So one for one brother, one for the other one. Now these, right? They both appointed the sisters came and they appointed a shliach to accept also the kiddushin. So the shliach of the brothers finds the shliach of the sisters and he gives it to him at the exact same moment. So therefore, it comes out that both of the kiddushins were chal in the exact same moment. At the exact same moment when he gave the kiddushin for both of them, it was chal. So what happens? It becomes eshet ach and achot isha, right? Which means becomes sister-in-laws on both ends. Sister-in-laws was the brother's wife, plus sister-in-laws was his wife's sister. So those are sister-in-laws times two, if you want to call it. But in Hebrew, it's called achot ishto, right? The wife's sister, and eshet ach, the brother's wife. So there, in that case, it becomes batachat in the exact same moment because they both accepted kiddushin at the exact same moment. So what happens is, according to Rabbi Chia in Shitat Rabbi Yosef, the isur batachat and the isur that comes at the exact same moment, mechayev tarte, you're still going to be chayav two different averot because of the sister-in-law, because it's the wife's sister plus the brother's wife. No. Here it's the same thing.
The same avera.
So now Bar Kapara comes and he holds Lo Mechayev Ela Chada, right? That you're only going to be chayav on one of the Yisurim and not two of them, which means that his shita is that it's only going to be done in an Yisur Mosif, not an Yisur Kolel, which means that first the one that's alive, which is Shimon, gets married, and only afterwards was the Nasa Met. And therefore says Rabbi Yoseh that he's going to be mechayev on two of the Yisurim. Okay, according to that, only in by an Yisur Mosif. So says the Gemara, Vehacha Ma Yisur Batachat Ikahacha. How are you going to find in the first two cases batachat? We explain batachat by melika, because when you do the melika, the exact same moment that you do the melika, the yisur of nevela kicks in, plus the yisur of a zar eating from the korbanot, because now it became a korban when you do the melika. So there you could find it, the batachat, in one moment. But in the first two cases, which was a zar working on Shabbat in the Bet HaMikdash, or in the second case, where you had a balmum, right, that's working betum'ah, okay, where do you find batachat in that moment? So answers the Gemara, very simple, right? What happened was that he became bar mitzvah on Shabbat. He brought two pubic hairs, right? And he became a gadol on the Shabbat. And therefore what happens is that you have the two isurim coming together, which means the isur of that he's a zar, he's not allowed to work on the Bet HaMikdash, and not allowed to work on Shabbat. So they both came at the exact same moment once the pubic hairs come in. Meaning in the first case, we said, 1 second, before Shabbat, you were permitted to work, and now on Shabbat, you're not permitted to work, right? Here, no. He only became bar mitzvah on Shabbat. So therefore, only on Shabbat does it become the isur of not working on Shabbat, plus does it become the isur that he's not allowed to work in the Bet HaMikdash, right? Because now he's becoming bar mitzvah. So those are two coming in one shot. So therefore, Zarut v'Shabbat, behadi adadi. What about the other case of the Balmum? Says the Gemara, Balmum Nami, also the Balmum that he's going to be working betum'ah, also is going to be in Isur Batachak. For example, again, he became a Gadol, he has the two pubic hairs. And then what happened is that he becomes Tameh, right? Sorry, he became Tameh before the two pubic hairs. So therefore, it's going to become also the two Isurim Batachat, the Balmum, right? And Tum'ah. Because remember, if he's not a Gadol, meaning he's a minor, right, there's no Isurim on him yet. So or you could have another case also. He cut his finger with a sakin tmeah. If he cuts his finger with a knife which is tameh, so therefore the knife which is tameh makes him tameh, plus it made him a balmum at the exact same time because he cut his finger. So therefore, in such a case, both of them come at the exact same moment. So therefore, since both of them are coming at the exact same moment, that's why we're saying according to Rabbi he holds it's going to be two, right? Because it's coming in two for one. Right? And Bar Kapara holds that it's only going to be one because again, all these isurim are only going to be an isur kolel and not an isur mosif. So it says, which one? Says the Gemara, Bishlema Rabbi Chia. I understand according to Shittat Rabbi Chia, Ki Tnaya Ledidei, when Rabbi taught to Rabbi Chia all these three cases, that you're going to be chayav two isurim, because remember, each one was screaming and swearing that Rabbi taught him whether it's going to be two or Rabbi taught him one. So he says, I understand good according to Rabbi Chia that when Rabbi came and he taught him these three cases, and we're talking about the two isurim coming in one moment, and in Liba the Rabbi Yosef, according to Rabbi Yosef, but Kitnei Bar Kapara, and when he was teaching, and according to Shtat, right, when he was teaching it to Bar Kapara, right, that is only going to be chayav one avera. So therefore, he was teaching in a Liba de Rabbi Shimon. It was going according to Shitat Rabbi Shimon. Ela le Bar Kapara, but according to Shitat Bar Kapara, that he's saying that even Rabbi Yosef holds that in Sur Batachat you're only going to be chayav in one of these surim. He says what? When he was giving it over in the name of Rabbi, what Rabbi Chia was lying? That he said you're going to be chayav shtaim, right? According to Bar Kapara, there's no Tana that ever holds such a thing. But it's not Rabbi Yosef, it's nobody. So what's going on? So he says, you're right. Ela kami palge, but rather the machloka between Rabbi Chia and Bar Kapara is B'isur bebatachat Paliba de Rabbi Shimon, not according to Rabbi Yosef, which means, right, that these three machlokot, again, we're talking about that it's still coming bebatachat, it's still coming at the exact same moment. But we're only going in the Shita of Rabbi Shimon that he says that by Yisur batachat is the Yisur Chalal Yisur or not. They both agree that according to Rabbi Yosef, it's going to be chayav two, right? Because of Yisur Batachat. So the Gemara is only going to say, according to, right, the Rabbi Shimon. Okay? So he comes and he says like this. Okay, which means Rabbi Chia holds that Rabbi Shimon argues that Rabbi Yosef only in a case of two Yisurim. For example, Eshet Ach and Achot Isha, when they come one after another. But Yisur Batachat, Rabbi Shimon agrees, right, that they're going to be Chayav on both of them. And according to Bar Kapara, he says no, that according to Rabbi Shimon, also in the case of Batachat, right, is you're only going to be Chayav, right, only on one. You're never going to be Chayav on two of the Averot. So says the Gemara now, Bishlama Rabbi Chia, I understand according to Shtat Rabbi Chia, right, Kamishtaba le'apuke Rabbi Shimon mecheskeh. He's swearing to take out Rabbi Shimon from his chazakah, which means Rabbi Shimon usually is mekel, and he says that the person's a muchzak, and therefore we're not going to say isur chal isur. The one isur adds on to another isur. Nevertheless, when we're talking about isur b'vatachat, he's more that it's going to be twice. It's going to be two different averot. But according to Bar Kapara, lama lelishtebue. Why does he have to swear? Right? What's the purpose? Right? At the end of the day, we're talking about isur b'vatachat. It's not different than anything, any of his shita, right? It's not anything of his shita. Answers? Kashya. You're right. It's a good question. We don't have an answer. It's a beautiful question. Meaning that according to Shitat, Bar Kapara, that it's only going to be one. Rabbi Shimon always anyway held that it's only going to be one. So because of that, why did he have to swear? You're right. It's a good question. Okay? Akadosh says the Gemara, Bishlema le Bar Kapara. I understand, according to the last explanation, right, that we're going to try to understand the Shita of Bar Kapara, ki atniye Rebbe ledidei, that when Rebbe taught it to Bar Kapara, that in all three cases of Yisur b'vatachat, right, that you're only going to be chayav one chatat, aliba de Rabbi Shimon, and it's according to Rabbi Shimon. Ki atniye le Rabbi Chia, but when he taught it to Rabbi Chia, aliba de Rabbi Yosef, according to Rabbi Yosef, right, and Rabbi Chia made a mistake, and he thought that we're passing like Rabbi Shimon. But according to Rabbi Chia, Bar Kapara shakul kameshaker. What, Bar Kapara is lying? Why? Because according to Shitat Rabbi Chia, there's nobody that actually holds like that. So answers the Gemara, Malecha Rabbi Chia answered you. When Rabbi taught it to Bar Kapara, that he says you're only going to be chayav one on one avera, or not on two averot. Tarte liftur atniye. He taught the ptur, right, of the isura shani, which means only to do with the first case, the first two cases, right, out of the three, which that was the machloka between Rabbi Chia and Bar Kapara, which means, what were the three cases? Remember, we're going back again. Three cases was a stranger that works on Shabbat in the Bet HaMikdash. There's two averot. He's being mechalel Shabbat, and he's a stranger that's working in the Bet HaMikdash. He's not a Kohen. Second case, a balmum that becomes tameh, and he serves in the Bet HaMikdash. Isur number one, he's a balmum. He's got a defect, a blemish. He's not allowed to work in the Bet HaMikdash, even though he's a Kohen. Isur number two, right? He's tameh. So those are two isurim, right? In the same moment. The third case was a melika case. You remember where the Kohen comes and with his nail, he comes and he cuts off the head of the bird. So therefore, and then a regular person is going to eat it. So if a regular person is going to eat it, he's over on two isurim. Number one, it's a nevela, because since it was not shchita done and it was done melika, which is with the nail, so that's considered nevela, right? That it's not a kosher bird. Right? What do you mean not a kosher bird? The bird is kosher, but it was not done a proper shchita, so you're not allowed to eat it. And number two, also, you're eating from a korban. So therefore, he's coming and he's saying that they were actually talking about the two first cases, which is basically zar sheshimesh b'Shabbat, a stranger that worked on Shabbat, or a balmum, a blemished person that he worked in Tumah. The Yisur kolel itniye, we're on 33b. The Yisur kolel itniye. Now, he taught it to do with the Yisur kolel. Right? Remember that the Isur Kolel means that it is an Isur, which is a general Isur. It's not adding on the Isur. So for example, right, if a person is not allowed to eat the Nevelah, and now it's Kippur. So Kippur is a general Avera for everybody. It's not only just on the Nevelah, right? It's on everybody. So now if you're going to eat the Nevelah on Kippur, it's two Isurim. You ate on Kippur, plus you ate a Nevelah. So, but that's considered a Isur Kolel. Okay, so Yisur Kolel Itneh, Rabbi Shimon, according to Rabbi Shimon, right? However, though, according to the Machloket of Rabbi Chia Bar Kapara, right? Then when you have a zar, the stranger that eats melika, right? So there's no difference over there whether Yisur Kolel only b'vatachat, as it came at this exact same moment. And it's going to be that according to Bar Kapara, when you have a zar, a stranger that eats melika, that eats from the bird with milika, instead of which is basically cutting off the head with the nail and not with how do you call it, shechita, right? So in such a case, they are coming in one moment. So since it's going to be compared to each other, because it's not going to be, they came and they put them together, which means since it was compared in his eyes, the psakim, right? So he comes and he says, and even though Lemaaseh, right, he heard it from Mamash, from the mouth of Rabbi, in that moment, Par Kapara did not actually pay attention that only it was the first two cases that we're talking about Nisur Kolel, Nisur Bevatachat, and therefore he comes and he says, right, in such a case that there was like three different sakim, even though it was only two. The Yemba, now if you look into the alaha, which means if you're going to pay attention into the alaha of a zar, a stranger that eats milika, velo ashkach ela bevatachat. So therefore you could only find in vatachat, which means like this. The other two cases where there was of Shabbat, right, a stranger that works on Shabbat in the Bet HaMikdash, or the other case of a balmum, a blemished person that works when he's tameh in the Bet HaMikdash, in those two cases, you could have two separate isurim at two separate times, right? Why? Because before Shabbat, right, it was already prohibited to work in the Bet HaMikdash, right? And now comes Shabbat, and now he's prohibited to work as well, in general, right? But it's one after another. It's not the exact same moment. We said that it could happen at the same moment when we're talking about a katan, that he became gadol, that he was a minor, that he became a pubic hairs on Shabbat in itself, and therefore the Yisur of Shabbat and working the Bet HaMikdash came at the exact same moment, right? Or the same thing, but it could happen one after another. The case of Milika cannot happen one after another. It only happens at the same time. Because the second that he does the Milika, he cuts off the head with this nail. Now at that moment, it becomes a Nevela, plus at that moment, it becomes Kodshim, it becomes a holy animal that was like a korban for the Bet HaMikdash. So for there is the only case where it could be bevatachat. Besavar, so he holds, mideha bevatachat, from the fact that we're talking about batachat in one moment, hanami, so too the other two cases, we're talking about batachat. Midehanach liptul. So therefore, just like over there, he says that it's patur, and you're only going to be chayav, right? Only on the zerut, only on the stranger, and not on, because it came at the exact same moment. Hanachnami liptur, so to here, you're only going to be chayav achat on one avera, and not on two different averot. Remember that we got into this entire Gemara all to do with if a person lives with his sister-in-law, which is his sister-in-law squared, meaning that it's his wife's sister plus it's his brother's wife, right? How does that mean? You have two brothers getting married to two sisters. So if two brothers get married to two sisters, and one of the brothers lives with the sister-in-law, it's his sister-in-law squared. It's his sister-in-law because it's his wife's sister, plus it's his sister-in-law because it's his brother's wife, right? Sister-in-law square. Yeah, you understand?
He shouldn't have done it, but after he did it.
Meitbei, we're going to ask the following question. Zar sheshimesh b'Shabbat. Yeah, a stranger, right? That he comes and he starts working the Bet HaMikdash on Shabbat. Or a balmum, sheshimesh b'tumah, a blemished kohen, that he works when he's tameh in the Bet HaMikdash. Yesh kan mishum zarut mishum Shabbat. You have zarut and Shabbat, a stranger and Shabbat, chilul Shabbat. Mishum balmum, mishum tumah. And you have a balmum, a blemished kohen. You have tumah. So you have two different averot for each thing. These are the words of Rabbi Yosef. Divrei Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Shimon omer. Rabbi Shimon says, En kanela mishum zarut umishum balmum milvad. So this was the same machloket that we mentioned above. Yeah, what you just said, Mordechai, that according to Shitat Rabbi Shimon, he argues on Rabbi Yosef. He says it's not two different averot. You only are chayav of one avera. What is the one avera? You have zar, that he's a stranger. Right? Right? You said Huzar, yeah? And then you said, right? After that, you said Balmum. Right? Balmum. So you have Zar and Balmum. That's the Gemara. Ve'ilu Melika, but Melika, Shaire, they didn't bring it down. Meaning, did you realize that over here, we brought down the machloket of Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yosef only in two of the three cases, the first two cases. We didn't bring down the third case. Only in the two cases. Right? Who did we leave it over for? If you're going to tell me that they left it over for Rabbi Yosef, if Rabbi Yosef is already going to tell you that by Yisur Kolel, which is a general Yisur, okay? It's a general Yisur. Remember, Kolel comes to a cloud. Cloud is a general rule. So it's still Kolel, right? He's going to come and he's going to say, you're going to be chayav on two. So obviously you should come and you should also be chayav two if it's going to be batachat, elala, rather it's according to the Shibat Rabbi Shimon. Isur kolelu de patar, but the shitat Rabbi Shimon is that you're going to be poter in Isur kolel, aval Isur batachat mechayev. You should be chayav. So tufta de kabar kapara, tufta. You're right. This is a good refutation against bar kapara. Yeah, you have to tell him to come in. Yeah, what does that mean? That bar kapara, he says over here, right? That it's going to be mechayev. He's going to be chayav. Okay. Next, zar sheshimesh b'Shabbat, a zar that he works on Shabbat. B'mai, which avodah did he work in order to be chayav on Shabbat? Remember, you have a stranger. He comes into the Bet HaMikdash and he works in the Bet HaMikdash on Shabbat. So he's Bechalel Shabbat plus he's a zar, he's a stranger. So what do you do exactly? Yeah? So says the Gemara, exactly, if it's going to be shechita bezak shera, he's allowed to do shechita. If you remember, we learned this many times around, right? Many times, right? That's not shechita, that's milika. Yeah? One more time, shechita. So therefore, remember that shechita is always keshera bezar, right? That, if you remember, was the question with Shmuel and Navi. Right? And Eliah Cohen, if you remember, that Shmuel paskind in front of his Rav. Right? That's why he was chayav mita. And Eli was going to kill him. Why? Because, right, shechita is keshera bazar. You're allowed to do it. So he says, anybody could do shechita. Right? Shechita can be done by everybody. You don't need a Cohen to do shechita. Right? That's why I do shechita all the time. He says, if right now we're talking about Kabbalah and holacha, what is Kabbalah? Receiving of the blood. What is holacha? Transporting the blood to the mizbeach in order to sprinkle it, right? So he says, over here, both of these things are posel, but he says, but it's at the end of the day, you're just a transporter. You're a UPS agent. You're just transporting. You're not doing anything, right? It's not okay, fine. So you're doing tiltul, but it's not mamash yisur melacha on Shabbat. So yisur mukser or whatever. But the ibaktara, if it's going to be they're bringing it right on the mizbeach, so you're bringing the korban on the mizbeach. The Amar Rabbi Yosef says Rabbi Yosef, Havara lelav yatzta. Havara, did you realize that the only one which is written in Furash in the Torah, the 39 Menachot, is the lav of lo tevaru esh b'chol shepet Yom Shabbat. You're not allowed to make a fire on the Yom Shabbat. So if you remember, we already learned this a few times, that why is it that the Torah came and specifically took the fire out of everything else? So there was a machloket there in the Gemara, and according to Shitat Rabbi Yosef, the reason why was to take it out, to make it a lav. What does that mean? Usually, if a person is mechalel Shabbat, they get sekilah b'mezid and chatat b'shogeg. So they get stoning if it was done purposely, and they get chatat. They have to bring a sin offering if it was done accidentally. However, though, here it's only a negative commandment. Why is it only a negative commandment? Because why did the Torah come and tell you mefurash, don't make a fire? Because it came out specifically to teach you that it's only a negative commandment. It's not the regular halachot of Shabbat that you get sekilah and everything else. So it comes out according to Shitat Rabbi Yosef. If somebody came and he made a fire in order to bring this korban on the mizbeach, what is it? He comes over here and he says what? He says in such a scenario, he's not actually going to be chayav sekilah or anything on Shabbat. Why? Because it was only love yatzta. So Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov says Rav Acha bar Yaakov, the shchitat paro shel Kohen Gadol. We're talking about the shechita of the par of the Kohen Gadol. Uchdivrei Omer, and just like the one that says shchitat paro shel Kohen Gadol bezar pesula. That means basically even though we always said that shechita is always going to be kosher by a zar, there is one shechita which is not kosher by a zar. What is that? The par of the Kohen Gadol. The part of the Kohen Gadol on Kippur,
he pays his own money.
Yeah, therefore, it cannot be done by a zar. It has to be done by him. He has to do it. That's what it says over here. He has to do it, right? Or a Kohen, but it's him, right? It's usually him. That he says over here, that's one of the chelek of the avodat Yom Kippurim. Okay? So therefore, he says, if you remember that basically he does the shechita, and the other Kohen has the cup immediately. The second that he cuts Rov Shteim, he quickly grabs the cup, he grabs all the rest of the blood, right? And then he continues going and walking. That's the Kohen Gadol on Kippur. So according to this, right, it is going to be the zar is going to be pasul in such a case. Now, shechita, right, is a yisur doraita on Shabbat according to everybody. It's not just a lav. Meaning, if you're going to tell me the making of the fire, according to Rabbi Yosef, that's only a negative commandment. Here, it's mamash 100% shechita. You're being mechalel Shabbat. So says the Gemara Yachiv. So my idea, right, zar. Why are you only telling me a zar? Even a kohen idiot is the same halacha. Because if the only one that could do the shechita is the Kohen Gadol on Kippur on his par, so therefore, even if it's going to be a regular Kohen, you have the same. Why do we bring down a case that it's a zar which is going to be mechalel Shabbat? Even a regular kohen is going to be chayav. So he says, you're right. Shazar etzlo kama. He's a zar to him, which means here, even a kohen idiot is called a zar. What's a zar? A zar means a stranger. Remember, what's the translation in Aramit? Chilonai, chiloni. Chiloni is a stranger. Okay, so therefore, what happens when it says v'zar? Zar just means it's stranger to him. The kohen gadol is a kohen gadol. Here, he's the highest level. Anybody, even a kohen idiot now is considered a stranger towards the kohen gadol, right? Usually, it's a Israel which is going to do it. So therefore, the kohen gadol has to do the shechita. In this case, the part of the kohen gadol. So it says in the Gemara, okay, fine, now it makes sense. But Matkif la Ravashi, Ravashi comes and he asks, Midi chataot katani or lave katani? Ele yisur b'alma kachashiv. Who's ever talking about now a chatat or a lav? We're talking about isurim. Meaning, until here, we were not talking about what type of an isur. We were talking about isur kolel, isur mosif, something that adds on, something which is general. But we weren't talking about chatat or lav or sekila, or we were just talking about in general, isurim. So says the Gemara, what do I care then? So he says, the reason why is because we have to understand that if he did two averot, he's considered a rasha gamur, and therefore he has to be buried by a reshaim gemurim. If he only did one avera, you don't bury him by a rasha gamur, you bury him later, because you see that even after death, where they bury a person is so important. Some people think, what do you care? The guy's 6 feet under, you think he knows who's he's buried beside? Yes, because even after death, when a person is buried, it causes him suffering if he's going to be buried beside a rasha. That's why it's so important to buy burial plots and to understand exactly where a person is going to be buried. He doesn't want to be buried beside some rasha. You understand?
It's also
very, very
important. If you eat too much.
Imagine you have two people that get married to two women. Now, when they come into the chuppah, right? So imagine there was kiddushin done. Remember that there's 2 steps of marriage: kiddushin and nisuin. So you have 2 people. A gets married to Mrs. A, and B gets married to Mrs. B. How did they get married? He gives her a ring. There's witnesses. Everything's beautiful. No problem. What happens is A gets married to Mrs. A, right, and B gets married to Mrs. B. They come all of a sudden to the chuppah. And when they come to the chuppah, A takes Mrs. B and B takes Mrs. A.
By accident?
What? Well, let's see. So says the Gemara, and they have relations with him. Yeah, so it says, Arelu chayavin mishum eshetish. They are going to be chayav because of eshetish. What is it? They're married women. Yeah, now what happens if the 2 of them, Mr. A and B, were brothers? So then they're also going to be chayav mishum eshetach, right? Because of the brother's wife. And if now they were also 2 sisters, right? Also, mishum ishalachota. Now you have these 2 sisters. And they were both nidot at the time. Mishum nida. So how many isurim did you have? You realize
a lot,
right? You have a lot of isurim. Yeah, okay. Says the Gemara. So now we have to separate them for 3 months. Yeah, separate them for 3 months. Why are you going to separate them for 3 months? Right? Shema mubaroten, because maybe they're pregnant. Yeah, vimayu ktanot. So now if they're going to be ktanot, which means she'en reuyot leled, which means what happens if they're minors? So they're not going to give birth or anything. So therefore, because remember, the 3 months is for havchana. Havchana is basically to distinguish, to discern whether they're pregnant or not. And then obviously you would know that the children are going to be mamzerim, obviously, right? And then so we have to know what is kosher children, not kosher children. So now he says over here, right, like this. So he says now as follows, yeah? He says, if they were minors, that they're not fitting to give birth, we give them immediately back to their wives. But if they were kohanot, right, so nifselu mina keuna, they become pasul, right, to the kohen. Okay, fine. So we're going to come and we're going to actually ask the question that you just asked. What are we referring to? Is it by accident? Is it on purpose? Let's see the Gemara. So says the Gemara, Lamed Gimel Amud Bet 33b, the Gemara. Says the Gemara, Echlifu. What are we talking about? People that are switching wives, swapping wives, right? Well, we're talking about Rishaim. What's going on over here? Right? They get married and all of a sudden they're swapping wives. What's going on? Yeah. So he says, The two, and furthermore, had the tani, that which we learned to Bechia, Hare Shekan, right? In this case, they're going to come to Sheshes Chataot. There's going to be 16 Chataot. Yeah? 16 Chataot. He says, because each one of them was going to be oved on 4 isurim. Married woman, the brother's wife, the wife's sister, and nida. So because of that, each one has to bring 4 korbanot chataot. So it comes out that both of them together have to bring 8, right? And now the women also have to bring, right, korbanot, right? Because there's no difference between men and women. So there's 16 chataot here brought, 4 by each of the culprits, right? 4 for each of the people, right? There's 4, okay? So now says the Gemara, so if you're talking about, here we're talking about 16 chataot, which means that it was by accident. Ibemezid, and if it's talking about bemezid, nika korban, is there korban? We know that if a person does something purposely, there's no korbanot. So what's going on? Yeah? So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yehuda says, Tani huchlefu. Yeah, what does that mean? We're going to learn uchlefu. What does it mean uchlefu? The women were changed, right? Which means bishogeg. Uchlefu. It was a mistake. They were swapped, but it wasn't on purpose. So says the Gemara, Hachinami mistabra. It's also
women.
What? Yeah, 1 second. Hachinami mistabra. You could also say it's logical. Why? Tiktani seifa. What was the seifa? If they were ktanot, if it was done purposely, can they ever go back to their husbands? If they purposely switched wives, they can never go back to their husbands. So obviously it was done by accident, and therefore we said that if they're ktanot, they would be back to the husbands. So says the Gemara, it's not a question. Halakashia, why? Pitui ktana onesu. Because even if it was going to be that they did it willingly, a ktana, a minor, is considered honest. By the way, in today, we also have the same thing. If somebody goes with a girl, right, and she's under 18 years old, and he has relations with her, and now he comes to court, he says, listen, she did it willingly. No. They say they consider it's bonus. They consider that it's force. It's a violation. Why? Because of the fact that she's a minor, right, that's it. There's nothing what to do. Okay?
It's called statutory rape.
Statutory rape. Very good. Right? So says the Gemara, honest Israel, Mishashari. So if it's going to be an honest, so by a Yisrael, it's going to be permitted. Okay? Ella, but rather, there's another proof. Because we learned in right. We're going to separate them for 3 months to find out if they're pregnant. But if they weren't pregnant, Shadian, they're going to be permitted to their husbands. Now, if it's going to be b'mezid, why are they going to be permitted? Before, you brought me a proof from the Seifa, which is the latter part, which has to do with what? Which has to do with
exchange.
With the minors. And a minor is always considered a violation. But here we're talking about women which are, or we're trying to find out whether they're pregnant or not. So you can't say that they're minors. So if we're talking about women which are older, and we're talking about that we're trying to find out if they're pregnant or not pregnant, and if they're not pregnant, you give them back to the husbands. Obviously, we weren't talking about that it was done violation. It was done purposely, right? Sorry, it had to be done right by accident, not purposely. So you're right.
Rabbi, it was done purposely by the men, but unpurposely.